Thank you, Yahuwah Elohim, for this opportunity to look into your word and to understand better what you've done for us and the means that you've given for us to get to the world to come with the Prince. And we thank you, and we ask you that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we see, hear, and understand what your word says. We thank you in the name of Yahushua. Amen. All right, so Ephesians. I taught a lesson some time ago. I've slept since then. But the lesson was, what did Paul know? Do y'all remember any of that? What did Paul know? Because Peter points out, and it's important that we understand, the writings of Paul are difficult to understand, and people are going to twist them to make them say whatever they want them to say. That's the Extreme Reader's Digest version of what Peter has to say. What did Paul know? Why was Paul so special that he would have been the one chosen, even though he was adamantly opposed to everything that Yahushua was doing? He was adamantly opposed to the Shlachim, the apostles. Why the change? And why was it so important that Paul, of all people, be the one to be chosen? Why not choose any of the other hundreds of other Pharisees? And we talked about this, that Paul was the brightest student of Gamaliel. By the age of 13, he'd memorized the Torah, he'd memorized the writings, he'd memorized the prophets, because you didn't walk around with your favorite version of the Bible. Back then, children memorized the scriptures. Greek children had to memorize the Iliad. If you ever read the Iliad, that sucker's this thick, and they memorized it. And on top of that, he had to memorize all the oral tradition that the Pharisees were spewing out at this time. And they'd started spewing it out around 140 after the end of the Maccabee incident, where they said, never again. This will never happen again. We will not allow ourselves to be Hellenized again. So they started to develop takanot, which over the period of time, the scribes became the Pharisees became the rabbis. And the rabbis finally codified the oral tradition in what we call the Talmud. Okay? So he was very knowledgeable. He knew the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and that's the main thing to understand. You cannot ever, you will never grasp anything that Paul has to say if you do not have an intimate relationship with the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Because everything he says is based on that. So when he was knocked to the ground, Yahushua says, what? Saul, why are you kicking against the goad? Okay? Why are you going contrary to the Lamed? Why are you going contrary to the instruction that you know to be true? And then he developed scales over his eyes, because it was a choice at this time. He realized how blind he had been. Why scales? Why not eye crust? Everybody likes eye crust, right? Try to open your eye in the morning on an allergy day. Why scales? Because Paul, at that point, had to make a choice. He could remain blind to the truth, or he could make the choice to acknowledge it and move forward in what Yahushua wanted him to do, which was to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay? Why scales? Because he had to make the right choice in the tet. He had to shed the serpent. Okay? So, we understand that. Ephesians, like his other writings, are books that I feel like, what's that guy that says, you got any cheese? What's, Urkel. Yeah, he turned into Stefan. I can be Stefan. Hi there. Or I can be Urkel. Okay. Anyway, yeah, it's great not having a hole there anymore. All right. Has nothing to do with the study, but I the whole time in the hospital I'm starving because they won't feed me anything until it starts gurgling, right? So I'm talking about this hatchet ribeye. I want a hatchet ribeye. So I get home, and here comes my daughter Megan from the store, and I swear this hatchet ribeye was this big, and the bone extended way out. and I ate the whole thing. Okay. And I was fine. All right, so Ephesians. What is the whole purpose of the Torah, the writings, the prophets, as they pertain to Brit Hadashah? What is the entire purpose? And we hear it said in circles. Well, it's showing us Yahushua. It's showing us Jesus. Okay, but in reality, it's pointing towards the prince in Ezekiel, which is not Yahushua. Yahushua plays a prominent role in that. Okay. Ephesians is one of those books that we really have to understand because it tells us what's going on. Okay, and we start in Ephesians 1:21. The main gist is in chapter 2, but we back up to 1:21. And it's talking about Yahushua. For far above all principality and power and might and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this world, but in the world to come. Okay? And has put, now still Yahushua, and has put all things under his feet and given him to be the head over all things in the Israelite congregation. Okay? In the Israelite congregation. It's given him to be all things in the Israelite congregation. Why is that important? First of all, he has all the power, all the dominion within the Israelite congregation. It's very important that we understand that. Okay? And it's put all things, where do we go? Under his feet. Why under his feet? Is anybody aware of the condition of Yahushua's feet in the book of Revelation? Are they tarnished brass or are they polished brass? They're polished brass. In other words, he has been given all the power and the authority for restoration, renewal of something are under his feet. That means that he has full authority for restoration. Restoration of you and me? Well, that's how we read it today because our scriptures have been Greco-Romanized. We have a New Testament. The Old Testament doesn't matter anymore. The problem is it's a single covenant. The covenant has never changed. We have a constitution. The constitution does not change. We can amend it, but the constitution doesn't change. Okay? So, but has given him all things in the Israelite congregation. Why is that an important phrase? Anybody want to guess? Slow down, not all at one time. Okay. Who is the Israelite congregation? Is it the house of Judah? Or is it the house of Israel? Or is it the kingdom of Israel? Both houses reunited. This is why we have the little episode in Matthew. I think, no, it's not in Matthew, forgive me. I think it's in Luke. I get it confused where it's at, but you'll know the one I'm talking about, where he's just finished talking to the 5,000, and he makes this goofball comment out there in the middle of the wilderness. He says, go give them bread, go feed these people. I can't send them home hungry. And they're all freaking out because how are we going to feed all these people? We can't feed 5,000 people. We don't have anything. It'd take all the money we had in the pot just to get a few loaves of bread. So here comes Peter in perfect Peter form saying, hey, I found this kid. He has 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. We can feed 5,000 people with this, right? And, the rest of the shlichim, the rest of the apostles look at him like he's growing a second head. So Yahushua blesses it. Okay? So we have 2 fishes. We have 2 houses. We have the house of Israel. We have the house of Judah. We have 5 loaves of bread, which is the 5 books of Torah. And he takes it out to 5,000 people. Okay? Takes it out to 5,000 people. Hine, or the hay, the first time we see hay as a root of a word in the Torah is in the word hine. That means to behold. Okay? To see. To behold. To behold the Aleph. 1,000 Aleph, 1,000. So in order for them to once again be able to see their relationship with Yahuwah Elohim, something has to happen. So the Shlachim, the apostles, are sent out. And everyone eats till they're satisfied. And they bring back from the people of the land, from the Goyim, from the strangers, 12 baskets full of scraps. In other words, the 12 baskets, the 12 tribes have been filled once again with the Torah of Elohim. And it comes back. So what is the purpose of the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and eventually something we call Brit Hadashah that does not mean a New Testament or a New Covenant? Hadashah is simply a word that means to restore something, to renew something. Brit is a covenant. It's the restoration of a covenant. The restoration of the covenant between Yahuwah Elohim and the house of Judah and the house of Israel that have to come together in order to be the kingdom of Israel, which will then be called, the kingdom of Israel will then be called the house of Israel. Okay? So you have the house of Israel that transgressed, but in the end, the house of Israel becomes the kingdom of Israel. All 12 tribes reunited. And all 12 tribes reunited become something very important that we call the prince in the book of Ezekiel. But in order to have a prince in the book of Ezekiel, you have to have a Kohen Hagadol. You have to have a high priest. Okay? Yahushua, if we read Hebrews, we know that Yahushua is now the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So we're getting a little bit of background into what's going on. Leviticus, we'll get to Leviticus in a minute. We remember after the golden calf incident that Moses tells the Levites to put on their swords and go through the camp and slay anyone who doesn't want to adhere to the rules. And they kill 3,000. The Levites bring death to the congregation. The Levitical priesthood is based on compliance, and death is the result of non-compliance. Peter at Shavuot goes out and ministers to the people, and 3,000 people accept the Bezorah. They accept the good news. Okay? 3,000 people are delivered, are restored. Okay? The priesthood of Melchizedek brings restoration. Okay? Two different things. We read in Hebrews that Yahushua has now become the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Okay? The Levitical priesthood has died. Well, how? How has the Levitical priesthood died? Because they're still Levites. Okay? And again, we've talked about all this, but it's good to have a little refresher before we jump into this so we understand it better. Yahushua in the genealogy of Matthew, if we read it correctly, because most of your Bibles, your English-based Bibles, are incorrect, and that it says that, and Jacob brought forth Joseph, the husband of Miriam, of whom came Yahushua. Well, in this case, the genealogy ends with Joseph, okay, because the bloodline cannot continue. But when we read it what we like to call the right way, this is based on the Aramaic. It says, and Joseph the Garah of Miriam. In other words, Joseph the father, the guardian father of Miriam, of whom came Yahushua. Now we have a complete bloodline all the way to Yahushua. And who's in that bloodline? Zadok, the high priest, and David, and through Zerubbabel, the kingship. So Yahushua, when he dies, Yahushua is the last flesh and blood, legitimate Levitical high priest. He ends the Levitical priesthood when he dies because the last high priest of the Levitical order dies, making the way for the restoration of the priesthood of Melchizedek. Another thing, through David and Zerubbabel, because remember, Haggai tells Zerubbabel that through you is going to come the signet, okay, because there would never be another king to sit on the throne. Yahushua never sat on the throne, but the bloodline makes Yahushua the last flesh and blood, legitimate king of Israel. What happens? The last legitimate flesh and blood king of Israel, who's never sat on the throne because Yahuwah will not go back on his word, dies. Okay? So we have removed the Levitical priesthood, and we have returned the kingdom and the kingdom rule back to Yahuwah, who is Elohim, and now Yahuwah is Melech HaOlam, the king of eternity. Okay? We look at Olam and we say, oh, well, it means world. Olam actually means eternity. Okay? It means a perpetual period of time. All right? So there's a background of what's going on. So when we look at this and we say he has put all things under his feet and given him to be the head over all things, saying Yahuwah has made Yahushua the high priest. He has made him the Kohen Hagadol over all things that pertain to the congregation of Israel. Therefore, the congregation of Israel has to unite in order to become the prince, because they are going to be the ones who minister to the people of the land, and Yahushua will be the Kohen Hagadol, who will also be called Malek for a 1,000-year period of time, because he is the one who's responsible for bringing the word of Elohim to the people of the land during this millennial time. Okay? So, 23 kind of backs this up a little bit, which is his body, the complete extension of him who fills all in all. He's the extension of him who fills all in all. The body is the extension of Yahushua. The Kohanim are an extension of the Kohen Hagadol. The Kohen Hagadol sets the tone. The Kohen goes out and ministers to the people of the land. Priest is an overrated word. The word Kohen actually means minister and teacher. Okay? They are to be the ministers and the teachers. And this is where we go to Shemot 19:5 and 6. Again, we've talked about it, but now we see how it plays into. If you will listen to my voice and guard my covenant, treasure my covenant, the word is shamar, means treasure, then you will be my unique treasure. And I will make you, and we read it in our best King Jimmy, a holy nation. And I'm not really quite sure what exactly a holy nation is, because I'm not really quite sure what the word holy means. There's no word for holy in Hebrew. The word kadosh means something that is set apart to a particular purpose. So what is he saying? You will be my special treasure, and you will be a nation that is set apart to a singular specific purpose. Then he says, I will make you a nation of Kohanim. You will be a nation of teachers and ministers. And what is their goal? To minister to the people of the land. Very important that we understand that if we're going to understand one of these verses when we get to it. Okay? So from there, we go to chapter 2, verse 1. And you has he made alive who were dead in trespass and sin. Oh, sin. That's another word that I really don't know what it means, because there's no concept of this idea of sin in Hebrew. In ancient Hebrew. Today it's been Greco-Romanized, and we have sin, and you can be full of sin. I'm not exactly sure what that is. The word here is hatat. Hatat. It means to stray away. What is it to trespass? To trespass is to do something you should not be doing. So what is it actually saying? And you has he made alive who were dead because you were into something that you shouldn't have been into because you strayed away. So the first question in this is, who is you? Who is he talking to? He's talking to the house of Israel. He's talking to the northern kingdom. You were dead. You were dead because in Hosea, Yahuwah says to them, I divorce you. You are no longer my wife, I am no longer your husband. In a divorce, the wife becomes dead to the husband. The only way she can come back is if the husband dies. Okay? So now he's saying, because of what Yahushua did, you were made alive. You are restored. You were dead because you were into something you shouldn't have been into because you strayed away from what you should have been doing. Okay? So how has he made them alive? we go to Yahushua at the Tav. Okay, we can call it, you know, some Bibles, the newer versions, the avant-garde versions. This one, as a matter of fact, is incorrect as well. Say the torture stake. He was put on a torture stake, and here are his hands up here, and he was died like this, and he was, you know, which is a form of crucifixion. Don't get me wrong. You still have to push up in order to breathe. You die of asphyxiation. Then we have old Helen, Constantine's mother, who did this in order to replace Constantine's cross. Okay? So we come up with this cross. Okay? The reality is, in those times, Romans would crucify on something like this. And this is actually called a Tav, which is interesting because he has the Aleph and the Tav. Yes, I'll take that one. Oh, okay, thank you. All right. So, what did Yahushua accomplish at the Tav? Okay. What is the popular viewpoint today? Well, a popular viewpoint today, salvation is by blood atonement and Yah's acceptance of the body for our atonement. It has never been in keeping Torah. Okay? In other words, the modern doctrine today is that Jesus was a vehicle of sacrifice and shed his blood so that our sins would be forgiven. Okay? Problem with that is that all sacrifices are mentioned in the book of Levi because it would have been the Levitical order that dictated what did what, especially in the sacrificial system. Nowhere in the book of Levi does it say anything, and again, this is old news, we're kind of recapping. Nowhere in the book of Leviticus does it state that a human sacrifice with the blood of that human being is required for the forgiveness of sin. Okay? You have, however, Yahuwah speaking to Solomon in 2 Chronicles saying, if my people will call upon my name, okay? We read it different ways, if my people who are called by my name, but we look at it in Hebrew, it actually says, if my people will call upon my name and humble themselves and repent, I'll hear them and I will forgive them. What is the requisite for forgiveness? You have to recognize it and not just have the intent to make teshuvah. You actually have to make teshuvah. And you make teshuvah and you begin walking forward. Elohim acknowledges it. Your sins are forgiven. Not your sins, okay? You're straying off course. It's forgiven. Why? If you make teshuvah, which means to turn around or to turn your course, you turn right back onto the right course, correct? Okay. My people will call upon my name. Acknowledge me. First 3 commandments. And humble yourself, which kind of falls into the 4th commandment of Shabbat. Then I will hear you, and I will forgive you straying off course. Just don't do it again, and I'll heal your land. Okay? So, what did Yahushua accomplish at the Tav? He accomplished 4 things. 4 things. Okay? The first 2 things we just talked about. He put an end to the Levitical priesthood through his death, and he put an end to the physical kingship or the physical requirement for a king in Israel, reversing Samuel. Remember Samuel, they were saying, we want a physical king. And Samuel is all bent out of shape, and Yahuwah tells Samuel, hey dude, don't freak out. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Let them be, I don't know if I can say this on tape or not, but I'll say it anyway. Let them be Democrats because here's a guy over here chasing a donkey around. Okay? Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. I'm sorry, Democrats. Okay. So those are the first 2 things he accomplished. The third thing he accomplished deals with the blood. You have to have blood to restore a covenant. Any covenant, the 2 people would get together, they would each shed their blood, they would put it on the covenant marker, they would intermingle it and saying, we are now one. Covenant is not a contract. Covenant is unbreakable. And this is why We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so the blood was necessary to restore the covenant, to bring the house of Israel back into covenant. Remember, we studied Galatians some time ago. The house of Judah, although they came close to breaking the covenant and were barely in covenant during the time of Yahushua, had never broken the covenant. The house of Israel had. Blood was necessary to restore that covenant between Elohim and them. The last thing, deals with the 30 shekels of silver. We kind of ignore that because, that guy, Judas, sold him for 30 shekels of silver. He could have gotten at least 50. When we read the Bible, anytime it gives us a number, there's a reason it gives us a number. Okay? In this case, it gives us 30 shekels of silver. Well, what does the 30 shekels of silver have the price? What does it have to do with anything? We have the blood to atone for the house of Israel, but something else is needed. The house of Israel has no value. Okay? So we go to Leviticus 27:4 that tells us that the woman 20 years of age and younger will give 30 shekels for her valuation. She gives it to the priest in order for her to have a dowry that can be offered. Okay? So what did Yahushua do? The fourth thing he did in his dying is that Judas Iscariot, Judah, would provide 30 shekels of silver to the high priest. Judas finds out that Yahushua is going to be crucified. He gets crucified. Judas is all distraught. He takes those 30 shekels of silver and he throws them at the feet of the high priest. He's paid the valuation price for the bride. So Yahushua restored the kingdom, restored the priesthood of Melchizedek, restored the covenant, and restored the value to the house of Israel. Okay? That's what happened on the Tav. Okay? So he has made alive. You are now alive. You are now viable. Don't let anybody tell you you're not viable. You're viable. And you and Judah can come together, and once it becomes cohesive, we'll move forward. Okay? So, in which times past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the Ruach, the spirit that now operates in Torah-breaking children. Who is the prince of the air? One of our favorite people, if you want his real name. Okay. Satan is not really a name. Satan is a result of a choice. Satan comes from the root shittim, or is the root of the word shittim. Shittim is a type of wood, but shittim as a word has connotations that mean uncontrolled emotion, impulse. Okay? Your desires, what you want. Okay? So when we read this, in times past you walked according to the course of this world, according to your emotional states, what you want, what you thought was best. Okay? Who's he talking to? He's talking to the house of Israel. You didn't want to be like the southern kingdom, so you went south. You built golden calves. You put them in 2 different temples. You did everything contrary to the Torah that you could. And you broke covenant. Okay? So, why is the prince of the power of the air such a powerful phrase for us to understand if we're going to understand something else that Paul is talking about in Thessalonians? And there will be a shout and the sound of the shofar, and those who are dead will rise first, but those who are alive will be taken up, and we will rise to meet him in the air. Okay? What does that mean? Am I going to meet Yahushua in the air? Or do I have to rise above the air in order to receive Yahushua? What does Yahushua mean? It means the restoration of Yahuwah. In other words, what he's saying is we will rise. We will rise above what we desire. We will rise above our emotional states to meet the restoration that comes from Yahuwah Elohim, who is what? The son of Adam, the son of man. You will see the son of man coming like the silver surfer on the clouds. Okay? Ben Ha'adam. Okay? The son of man. Well, what does that mean? If we take the root of Ben, which is Bana, then we have something that means to be restored, to be established. Adam means humankind. It doesn't become the name of the first guy until the 4th chapter in Bereshit. Up until then, when you read it in Hebrew, it says Ha'adam, the Adam, because the Adam is everyone, male, female, it doesn't make a difference. Okay? So you will rise and you will see Ben Ha'adam coming down. In other words, you will rise to the restoration of Yahuwah because you rise above the air. You rise above the principality, the enticements of the Satan. And then you will see Bana Ha'adam, the restoration and reestablishment of the Adam coming down. Okay? And this has to take place in order for there to be people of the land. We're setting up for the prince to exist. We've already set up for the Kohen HaGadol to exist. And we will be right back where we were when he created humankind in the 1st chapter of Bereshit, because let us make Ha'adam in our image. And in the image, and he made them male and female. Okay? That's where he tells us he made them male and female. So it wasn't the name of the first guy. And then in the 2nd chapter, we all from theology say, well, the 2nd chapter just is a detailed explanation of the 1st chapter. No, he made the people of the land. And then he sets out to make a special person. When did he make the special person? He made him on the 8th day. Because on the 7th day he rested. Okay. In other words, he made them on the 8th day. The 8th day is he made them in the kingdom of Elohim. And he placed Eden towards the east. Why would he place Eden towards the east? That's where Babel would be built. Because he placed the word of Elohim on the place specifically where temptation would occur. Then what happened? The Adam failed. The Adam was created to minister to the people of the land. But he didn't. They didn't. Ish and Isha did not. So they were expelled from Eden. And we move forward now. We have a disaster until we have this guy named Abraham that comes along. And Abraham was counted as righteous because he believed. Okay? And then he promises Abraham, I will give you all of this. And through your seed will all the nations of the earth be blessed. Through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be grateful. So we can use that word for that as well. Baruch. Okay? So we move on to, now we have 12 tribes, and they do this whole, they get all, they're just horrible. Horrible. And Elohim says to Moses, get out of the way. I'm going to wipe them all out. And I'm going to raise up a seed through you to carry out my purpose. And Moses says, hold the phone, boss. Let me have a chit chat with them. They'll be okay. Now, had Yahuwah Elohim destroyed the 12 tribes and kept Moses, which we would have kept the tribe of Levi, would he have broken his promise to Abraham? No, because Moses was still a seed of Abraham. However, all 12 tribes were necessary. All 12 tribes have different names. All 12 tribes have different attributes. All 12 tribes contribute to the personality of the prince. Yahuwah will never break his promise. The promise was made to Abraham that through Abraham, through the seed of Abraham, all the nations would be blessed. He is not going to break that promise. One way or the other, there is going to be a prince comprised of all 12 tribes, comprised of the seed of Abraham, that will minister to the people of the land and bless the nations of the world. Okay? So, there we go. Okay. Let's go back to this mess. All right. So the Ruach that now operates in Torah-breaking children. The Torah that now operates in Torah-breaking children, or the Spirit that operates in Torah-breaking children. What is that? Yahushua told us that it would happen. There will come many a people claiming to come in my name who will teach all kinds of stuff, and he'll tickle the ears of the people, and they will all just fall for it. So we have in the Jewish world, we have the ultra-Orthodox, or the Hasidim. We have the Orthodox. We have conservative. We have Reform. We have Reconstructionist. We have liberal. Judaism. I'm not going to name all the branches of Christianity because as of 2016, there were 41,000 different denominations of Christianity, every one of them with their own particular sets of doctrine. Okay? How do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? Do we try to mold the Bible to fit whatever our doctrine says, or do we test our doctrine based on what Torah says? I will tell you from experience, having gone to seminary, that you are required to mold the Bible to fit your doctrine. They teach the same thing over and over and over. They've taught it for millennia. They tell you what they want you to answer on the test, and if you don't answer on the test what they tell you to answer, you fail. Okay? Don't question it. So, with that, just real quick to 18:3 of Matthew. Y'all don't have to go. I'll read it for you. 18:3. Truly I say to you, except you turn to me, Yahushua talking. Now, turn to me. Is it turn to Yahushua? Or is Yahushua talking of himself as a personification of the Word? If he's the Word, then he's talking about himself as the personification of the Word. He is the Torah. Okay? So, I say to you, except you turn to me and then become as little teachable children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. All right? So we have to break this spell. What is the truth and what is not the truth? What is Torah? What is not Torah? And I will tell you right now that a lot of the things that Torah observant believers believe is not Torah. Because you've made it harder, or they've made it harder on themselves than it has to be. Talmud says there's 613 takanot. You have to follow all 613 commandments. In other words, you have to follow the 10 commandments, you have to follow the dietary rules, you have to follow the rules of the Levites, the sacrificial system. You have to follow all of these rules. So the Hasidics, the ultra-Orthodox, have come up with a unique solution to this. They came up with the doctrine of reincarnation. In order for you to get all 613 mitzvot, you can't do it in this lifetime. Because you can't do the Levitical unless you are a Levite. You can't do the mitzvot of the Cohen unless you're a Cohen. So I will just come up with a doctrine that says that I can reincarnate, and I can reincarnate in the past as a Levite, and then I can do sacrifices, and I've completed those mitzvot. And then I can reincarnate again and go back to the past as a Cohen. Then I can do that. And then once I've completed all 613 mitzvot, I'm good to go. Okay? How many mitzvot are we actually required to follow? 10. 10. And we'll get to that in just a second. All right. Among whom also we all used to have our conduct in times past, to the lust of the flesh, fulfilling desires of our flesh and our mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as were so others. And this is a beautiful play on words. We're the children of anger, after he says that there's a prince of the air. The word wrath, the word anger. In ancient Hebraic thought, they really don't have a word or an idea of what it is to be angry. You get angry, the word af simply means the flaring of the nostrils. Well, what does that have to do with anything? What happens when you flare your nostrils? Right? What's happening to the air? It's being disrupted. A disruption of the air. Disruption of the air, why? The spirit is disrupted because you fall away from Torah. You disrupted the spirit of Elohim because you were intent on following the spirit of the air. You stepped away from the instruction of Elohim because you were, what it tells us here, you were tied into your own conduct. You were tied into the lust of the flesh. You were fulfilling the desires that you lost in your mind. You're doing what you want to do. And when you do what you want to do, and there's nothing wrong with doing what we want to do. There's nothing wrong with what we want to do. I like to do some things. Everybody likes to do some things. But when you do the things that are contrary to Elohim, then there's a problem. But they got so tied up in doing things that went contrary to the instruction that they fell away. Okay? And this is what he's saying. This idea of wrath, off, the disruption of air, means that you are falling to the emotions and the enticements of the Satan. Okay? And who did that? In beautiful form. The house of Judah did, but not to the point where they broke the covenant. The house of Israel did, extremely so. You know, when we look at this, we have to look at one of the kings that wrote a book. I call it his book of regret, his book of teshuvah. Solomon was a wise king, but he was a tyrant. He was a very, very evil king. Okay? He enslaved the northern kingdom. He brought in pagan peoples to build the temple, and he made the temple open to all peoples, not just the people who would follow Yahuwah Elohim. But down the road, he realized that everything that he was doing was, first verse in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities. Havel shech havel. It's all air. Okay? Havel means air. It means emptiness. Okay? And this is what Solomon's telling us, that everything is a gift from Elohim. Nothing that I have ever done will make me go any further. Everything that I've accomplished will be left to someone else. There's nothing better for me than to eat, drink, and enjoy the fruit of my labor, because this is the gift of Elohim. I have to live my life. And in order to live my life, I have to follow also what Yahushua said. What are the 2 commandments? Love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And on these 2 things hang the Torah and the prophets. This is what the prince is to teach. And they can teach that through something that we'll talk about in a second. Okay. But Yahuwah, who is rich in compassion for his great love through which he loved us, even when we were dead in our chatat, has made us alive together with Moshiach. By unmerited favor, you are, an overrated word, saved. How about you are restored to favor? That's what it should actually read. You are restored to favor. Who's he talking to? He's talking again to the northern kingdom. He's talking to the house of Israel. But let's look at this. But Yahuwah, who is rich in compassion for his great love, through which he loved us, even though we were dead in our hatat, has made us alive together with Moshiach. Now, here is a beautiful thing. He's made us alive together with Moshiach. You cannot have a prince. You cannot have a nation of Kohanim unless you have a Kohen HaGadol. You have been restored to life as what you were intended to be, along with Moshiach, who's been restored to what he was supposed to be. Now, that Yahushua was Messiah, is that any big deal? Anybody? Not really. The Kohen HaGadol, Aaron, and his sons were called Mashiach. The Cohens were called Mashiach. The kings of Israel were called Mashiach. There have been a lot of messiahs throughout history. Cyrus the Great, who wasn't even Jewish, was called Mashiach. Why? Because they were anointed to do certain things. Yahushua is Mashiach because he has to be Mashiach in order to be the Kohen Hagadol in the order of Melchizedek. He has to be anointed to do that. Okay? So when he's called Mashiach or he's called Malek, it still refers to him as the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest. Okay? So it was unmerited. You did not deserve this. Remember, I killed you off. But I made a promise to Abraham. I can't leave you dead. I have compassion for you, and I love you in such a way that I'm going to make a way for you to be restored. And the way was the four things accomplished at the Tav to restore both kingdoms back together. And the Pharisees, who were believers in Yahushua, fought Paul tooth and nail, saying they can't be restored until they're circumcised, and they can only believe in Yahushua if they're circumcised. And Paul is very adamant in Galatians, saying, no, it has to be a circumcision of a heart before it can be an actual circumcision. You have to want to do it before you commit to doing it. And again, old news, but the generation of righteous Hebrews that survived the death of the old generation, when they came to the Jordan to cross over, had still not been circumcised. Why? Because they had to learn everything. When they came to the Jordan, it's time to cross over. That's when the circumcision took place. Then they crossed over as a fully embodied covenant people. Okay? So, in order for the covenant to be restored, they have to relearn everything. Then we move back into covenant. They still haven't been circumcised because we still don't have the 12 tribes, although I'd like to believe that there are pockets of tribes out there that are forming that know what is exactly was being said. But who they are, I don't know. Okay? And has raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Mashiach Yahushua. So both houses, the United Kingdom of Israel, all 12 tribes are recognized in the realm of Elohim. Okay? Where do we find a reference to this? We go to Matthew 16. We go to Matthew 16, 13, and 19, which is in this here Bible somewhere. All right, 16, 18, and 19. Okay. 16, 13 through 19. Okay, so Yahushua's asking. He's asking his Talmud. He's asking his Talmudim. He's asking his disciples. There's a difference between a disciple, which is a disciplos, which is a Greek word, and a Talmudim, which is an Aramaic word. Disciplos is someone who learns something. Talmudim is someone who learns something and applies it. Okay? So he's talking to them. And he says, who do people say that I am? The son of Adam? And some say that you are Yochanan, the immerser. Some say that you're Elijah. Some say that you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said, no, but who do you say that I am? And here comes Simon. You got to love Simon. And Simon answered and said, you are Mashiach, the son of the living Eloha, not the living Elohim, the living Eloha, who has come into this world. Okay, so why would he call him the living Eloha instead of calling him the son of Elohim? Because it's now become a personal thing. Elohim is many powers. Eloha is a singular power. Eloha is what existed in the garden. Elohim is what became because it was going to take a whole lot of different powers to fix the mess. But Eloha is the personal relationship. And Yahushua answered and said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in the heavens. And I say also to you that you Kepha, and upon that you are Kepha, you are the rock, and upon this rock I will restore my congregation. The house of praise, the house of relationship. We call it the house of prayer, but prayer is kind of an overrated word. the house of communication, the house of unity. Okay? And the gates of Gehenna, the gates of basically death and rotting away of the body, will not stand against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of the heavens, and whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in the heavens, and whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed on the heavens. So when we go back and we say that they're recognized now in the kingdom of heaven, we have to understand that the full authority of the kingdom of heaven will be given to the prince. That is the rock on which everything is built. Not on Peter, who would go on to form the Catholic Church and be the first pope, and that's why it says, Peter, you're the rock, and I'm going to form my church on you. That's where we started. But the reality is the rock that Yahushua is talking about. You are Peter. You're a rock because you understand. You are Eben. Okay? You are Eben. You are a stone. The root of Eben is Bana. Peter, you are restored and established. And on this restoration, I will build the kingdom. Okay? So when we go back to Ephesians, understanding this, okay, and has raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenly places in Mashiach, is that through Mashiach, the prince will now be recognized with full authority in the kingdom of Elohim. And now that full authority, they go back to Shemot 19 that we'll talk about in just a second. Okay? That in the world to come might show the exceeding riches of his unmerited favor and his mercy towards us through Mashiach Yahushua. For by unmerited favor, okay, you are delivered through emunah. Okay, you are delivered through faith. I'm not really quite sure exactly what faith is. The word emunah, which is the root of amen, let it be so. Emunah is a word that means a truth that can be verified. So, for unmerited favor are you emunah, that through truth, or you are delivered through a truth that you can verify. Don't be delivered through what we read about earlier, things that don't line up with the instruction of Elohim, things that come from your own desires, things that come from your mind, things that come from your carnal obsession with something. You have to be delivered through the truth that can be verified. So, we said earlier, a lot of people say, well, this is the truth. And you go and you read it down, can I verify this? When we look at the word truth in Hebrew, it tells us exactly what the truth is. You have the first letter of the Aleph Beit, the middle letter of the Aleph Beit, and the last letter of the Aleph Beit. If you want the truth, then the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story all have to match. If you have any discrepancies in any of it, then you need to re-examine why you believe what you believe. Okay? Now, it's saying that through faith we're saved is basically how you would read this in your best King Jimmy. And then it goes on, not by our mitzvot, not by our works did any man boast. Okay, what works is he talking about? He's talking about all the takanot that's developed by the rabbis, or by the Pharisees at this point. They would become the rabbis a few hundred years later. You cannot be saved by your interpretations of the Torah. You have to stick to what the Bible actually says. And it's not that difficult for you. That's what Moses told the children of Israel. Okay? Not by mitzvot shall anybody boast. So we're not saved by works. We're not delivered through our works. What does Yahushua have to say about works in the book of Revelation when he opens the Lamb's book of life? What is he looking for in the Lamb's book of life? What did you do? I'm looking to see what your works were. What did you do? James, actually Yaakov, it's not James, became James when King Jimmy said, okay, I'll authorize your Bible on 18 conditions. One of those conditions was, my name has to appear in the Bible somewhere. So they said, okay, we'll change the epistle of Yaakov and make it the epistle of James. There we go. We'll give you a whole epistle if you'll authorize this, King Jimmy. Okay? The epistle of Yaakov. What does he say? Faith without works is dead. In other words, emunah. You can verify the truth, but if you don't do anything about it, it's worthless. If you don't take action on what you believe, it's worthless. So what works are we supposed to do? We're supposed to live according to what the Torah tells us because we are able to verify it. Don't live by something that we can't verify. I don't have to get up in the morning and once I've put my pants on, put my right shoe on, then put my left shoe on, then go back and tie my right shoe, then go back and tie my left shoe. This is in the Shulchan Aruch in the Talmud that tells you how to put your shoes on and which one to tie first. And the people in neighboring communities were freaked out because they didn't have shoelaces. What do? Well, you put your right shoe on first, then you put your left shoe on first. You put your left shoe on. Okay? What does that have to do with anything? Okay. The hokey pokey, yeah. All right. So here's one of my favorite verses in Ephesians. For we are his masterpiece, recreated in Mashiach Yahushua, to good mitzvot, which Yahuwah has ordained beforehand that we should perform as our halacha. Beautiful verse. We are his masterpiece. Who is we at this point? At this point, the masterpiece is the whole kingdom. The whole kingdom is the masterpiece, recreated in Moshiach Yahushua. The whole masterpiece, the whole master plan. The prince is the masterpiece, and it's recreated through the Kohen Hagadol in the order of Melchizedek. I have restored what I intended to do in the good works which Yahuwah has ordained beforehand that we should perform as our walk, as our halacha. Who are they? What is it? Shemot 19:5-6. If you will listen to my voice, if you will treasure my covenant. We can take this word for covenant, shalom, and actually give it another meaning. If you will treasure the relationship that you have, then you will be my special people. And you will be set apart to the unique purpose of being a nation of Kohanim. If you will listen to my word. Now, he hasn't given them any word yet. I can hear music. Okay, anyway, he hasn't given them his word yet. What halakha are they going to walk by if he hasn't given them the word yet in this? They say everything that Yahuwah Elohim says that we will do. Okay? That was the oath. Okay? Let's keep that in mind. That was the oath. Then he gives them the halakha. He gives them the good works that were ordained beforehand that you must perform. He says, Anochi Yahuwah Elohecha, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You shall have no other Elohim before me. You shall not make any other Elohim or bow down to them. Because if you do, the third and the fourth generation are going to hate me. In other words, because if you make another Elohim and bow down to it, you will become the third generation. You will become arrogant and prideful, and you will be dissuaded by the prince of the air and become the fourth generation, the Dalet. You will become a spiritually poor people. But you must remain the 1,000th generation that loves me and keeps my commandments. The 1,000th generation, the Aleph, that if you will recognize me and walk according to the way that I'm about to tell you to walk, you will be my people. Okay? Third commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Okay, so we shouldn't take the name of the Roman deity of fertility, which is lard, and the deity of fortune, or we could go a little bit farther down the road, the Teutonic deity of the sky, which had a nice white flowing beard, wore white robes, and Michelangelo drew him on the Sistine Chapel reaching out to some naked dude named Adam. God. Or, you shall not bring my name to nothing, is what it actually says. Don't forget who I am. Don't forget who I am. And people say, well, we don't know what the name is. We have no way of understanding. Well, that's kind of let's not use that one. We have no way of knowing what the name is. I don't know how to pronounce that. We have no vowel sounds. Okay? So, we have well, I got this backwards. Let's try this again. There. Now I got it right. Okay. So let's go back over here. We have this. Uwa. We have this now. Okay? Paleo-Hebrew. Paleo-Hebrew. Now, Paleo-Hebrew is a wonderful language. Yah. It will always be Yah. You won't change it from Yah. The Vav became the Vav sometime after the diaspora. Prior to that, in ancient Hebrew, it was Ua. Always be Ua. The Hey is silent. Why is the Hey silent in Yahuwah? Because it's saying that this name is a feminine name. There you go. That solves that argument that God is a woman. Why would this name be feminine? Because in the Torah, things that are feminine refer to spiritual aspects. Yahuwah is spirit. Okay? So, for millennia, he was called Yahuwah. Until shortly after the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, where many things changed. They crucified tens of thousands of Jewish males, leaving the female population pretty much to be it. The female population got raped left and right. So you had children being born of illegitimate fathers, and the rabbis in their wisdom changed the rules of the Torah and said that genealogy can only be measured through the mother. Because we know that the mother's Jewish, we don't know where the father came from. Okay? That's the first thing. Something else that happened after the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, that was just an extra. Has nothing to do with anything. Second thing that happened after the rebellion of Bar Kokhba is that we're moving on now to transforming from the Pharisees into the rabbis, and these teachers, these highly knowledgeable teachers, were getting killed left and right for teaching the Torah because the Torah was illegal. Worshipping Yahuwah Elohim was not legal in Roman circles because you had rebelled. You can no longer have your religion. You now have to fall under ours. The Jews in ancient Judea under Roman rule had it pretty good. They were one of the very, very, very few peoples that were allowed to keep their religion intact, worship their deity. All they have to do is pay taxes to Rome. That's all you had to do. But they didn't do that, so they had this rebellion. So what happens is the rabbis are getting killed left and right. They're getting caught, and any rabbi who uses the name is instantly put to death. So, in their wisdom, they come up with this. Okay? These are the vowel sounds in the Masoretic text to remind the reader not to use this name, because these are the vowel sounds of the word Adonai. So we've now replaced Yahuwah with Adonai. But over the millennia, we forget this pronunciation. We say Adonai until we're blue in the face, but the early Ecclesia Catholicum makes it illegal for any Christian to be involved in anything Jewish. We cannot worship the Jewish God, so we changed the name to the Lord God. In time, he went from, they went to Kurios, and then from Kurios we went to Lord. From Elohim we went to Zeus, and then from Dios we went to God. Because we have a whole wide assortment of deities that we can pick one that makes some kind of sense in English, I guess. So now we have people today that are saying, oh no, the pronunciation is still Yah, but this is now a Vav. It's no longer an Ua, because in modern Hebrew it's now a Vav. But so now we have this name Yah, and where they get the extra H, I don't know. Yah, Ho, because there's the Olam, Va, Yahovah. And then the lovely people that knock on your door early Saturday morning and say, hello, I'm from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and I would like to tell you about Jehovah. Well, there's no J, it's still a Yah. But now, a lot of our books, King Jimmy, for example, the one place that you find the name of Elohim, it's Jehovah. Okay? What's the name? It's always, no matter who argues with you, this is how you pronounce it. Okay, there's no, you can't argue with the Paleo-Hebrew. And that's, people will argue with the Paleo-Hebrew. And they will argue with it until they're green in the face. There's some people that say the first is Yehuah. But there happens to be an American Indian tribe, and I think it was the Iroquois, that have a very special relationship with the deity from their ancient ancestors, whose name was Yahuwah. And a lot of their writing, or a lot of their songs and their hymns happen to be psalms. New Mexico, you have stones that are 3,000 years old that have Paleo-Hebrew written on them. Where did these people come from? Okay. The Iroquois, that deity, their main deity, is named Yahuwah, and it's still written in Paleo-Hebrew. Okay, so I don't know where we're going with all this, but the halacha. So what is the halacha he's given them? First 3 commandments. Know who Elohim is, build a relationship with Elohim. 4th commandment, you shall keep the 7th day. So we only have to remember to keep the 7th day holy. Again, I don't know what holy is. Set apart the 7th day. Okay? So one day a week, I have to remember my relationship with Elohim, and I can forget it the other 6 days. Right? Well, it's Shebi Yom. It's the 7th day. It says the 7th day. So 7th day. Then we get into Jewish circles, ultra-Orthodox Jewish circles. You gather with your family for Shabbat dinner, and you sit down, you sing and you dance and you drink wine and you eat food and you have family time. The next day you go to shul for a few hours and you come home and you play games with the kids and you have family time. And as for me, I sit in my recliner and I kick back and, am I remembering anything that has to do with my Elohim? Because I guarantee you, I go to shul and unless I'm involved. If you've ever been to an actual Jewish synagogue on a Saturday to sit through the 4-hour service, that's why they have Kaddish after the 4-hour service, because everybody's about to die of hunger. It's really a fascinating, wonderful time. You know, it's beautiful listening to the Hebrew be read by the cantor and everything, unless you're young and then you don't want to have anything to do with it. Your children throw a fit so that you have to take them out into the hall and hang out with them so that at least your wife can enjoy it. But what time have you spent with Yahuwah Elohim? What time have you as an individual spent remembering Elohim? So let's examine Shevi Yom. Shevi Yom. Yom, okay, it's a Hebrew word for day. But Yom, like other Hebrew words, has about half a dozen different definitions. One of those definitions is it means a period of perpetual time. No specific time. No specific time to Shevi. Okay, so 7 unspecified times. Well, the root of Shevi is Shabbat, that means an oath. That unspecified periods of time throughout your week, you need to stop and remind yourself of your oath. What is your oath? Everything that Yahuwah Elohim says, that we will do. He's saying, you said this before I gave you your commandments. Now I'm reminding you to remind yourself. Okay? Now it's nice to keep a day and say, I'm not going to do anything today. How many people have oxen that refuse to stay out of the ditch on Saturday? I have very unruly oxen. Okay? The next commandment is very important as well. Honor your mother and your father. Okay, so I'm going to love 2 abusive parents that beat me and put me in a closet and duct taped me and everything else. Honor my mother and my father. I had good parents, so yeah, I'm going to honor my mother and my father. I couldn't ask for a better son. But let's consider something else aside from simply honoring your mother. Something other than honoring, well, let's spell it right, your and honoring your Av. We've looked at this before, but for the sake of the new people, we'll play with it again. Okay? Both of these, this has a numerical value of 41. This has a numerical value of 3. You put them together as 44, which is the same numerical value as this word, which is dam. Dam means blood. Blood represents what in the Torah? Your life. So is it so much honoring my mother and father, or is it that I have to respect my life? First and foremost, I have to respect my life. Because if I don't respect myself, I cannot keep the next 5 commandments, which deal with how to deal with other people. What did Yahushua say? First part of the commandment, you shall love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. The second commandment is just like it, that you love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself first, honor your mother and father, before you can worry about do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, do not commit false witness, and all the other ones that go with it. I can never remember the last 5. Maybe I'm not keeping them, I don't know. Okay? So what is the halakha that they are to walk? What is the halakha that they are responsible for teaching to the people of the land? They are responsible for teaching 10 steps to have a relationship with Elohim. Everything else, we have to understand it from a deeper perspective. Because if we try to look at the Torah and understand dietary laws based on simply what they say, then we're going to kill ourselves trying not to eat a whole bunch of stuff. If we try to keep the Torah and, not do this or not do that because the children of Israel were commanded, and we read it literally, we're going to miss a lot of what we had. We have Bibles in English. We have them in Spanish, Afrikaans, Pidgin English, Japanese, Korean. They've got them for tribes in the Amazon that no man has ever seen. Can I read them in my language and have an idea? Yeah, I can read them in my language and have an idea. Can I read them in my language and truly understand? No. There's a reason that Hebrew exists. It's the language of the kingdom of Elohim. We have to be able to understand from his point of view. Anyway, there we go. All right, so therefore remember that you being in times past nations in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by those called Brit Milah in the flesh, made by hands. Okay, so who's he talking to now? Who are the people of the uncircumcision? The northern kingdom. Even if they were circumcised, they're still uncircumcised because they don't fit, because they've strayed away. Yahushua brought them back. So now they are once again part of the circumcised. Who's telling them they can't be part of it? Those who are of the Brit Milah. Again, something that Paul was fighting with. The Pharisaic believers in Yahushua would say, no, they cannot fit in because they haven't been circumcised. And even if you were circumcised, you had to be circumcised again. It's that way today. If you are born to a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, in order for you to become part of the social club, you have to undergo conversion, go to a class, even though you've probably been raised in this stuff, and then you have to go to the moil, and they have to draw blood from that particular appendage for you to be part of the social club. And that's what it was like back then. Paul's saying no. They have to learn first. Then they have to have the desire to be in this relationship. And once they have the desire, then we can move on to the physical aspects of things. Okay? Would you like to have a surgeon that is well trained and has spent years and years and years learning and practicing how to do very, very complex heart surgeries or brain surgeries? Or would you like someone who isn't really quite knowledgeable on what it is? Just go ahead and cut into my head. It doesn't make a difference. Just don't say oops too loud. In most brain surgeries, there's no feeling in the brain once you get past the skull. Anyway, that's another thing. All right. That at the time you were without Moshiach, being excluded aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, as a stranger from the covenant of promise, having no part, and without Eloha in the present world. Okay? This is what you were. He's talking to the children of Israel, the house of Israel. That you had nothing. You had no relationship with Eloha, not just with Elohim, with Eloha. Okay? But now in Mashiach Yahushua, you who sometimes were far off are made near by the blood of Mashiach. And we talked about the blood of Mashiach. You're made near, you're brought close, you're brought back into the folds because something has been given for you to bring you back into covenant. You didn't have to do anything. I made a covenant with you and you didn't have to do anything. Yahuwah made a covenant with Abraham. He didn't have to do anything. All he had to do was cut some animals in half and take a nap. And I imagine after you cut a big bull in half, you're probably tired because he didn't have a chainsaw. Now, I want you to understand how rough this was. He cut this bull in half using flint knives. There was a show on TV. I love this show. I'm sad that it didn't air more than one season. I guess people weren't interested enough. It was called The Butchers. And it was a competition of 4 different butchers. They'd get together and one obviously wins in the end. But the first round, they would give them primitive tools to start off. And they had this big carcass of an animal, and they gave them a flint knife and said, okay, you have to cut this carcass in half and begin to do your thing. Imagine what it would be like for Abraham. But Abraham didn't have to do anything. He fell asleep. Yahuwah Elohim is the one who walked through the middle of it and lit the flame. Yahuwah is the one who said, I am going to guarantee this covenant. I don't need anything from you to guarantee it. Yahushua, as a human being, shed his blood so that the blood of humankind would be represented, but also as a direct instrument of Yahuwah Elohim, also provided the blood on the part of Yahuwah Elohim. Okay? But humankind didn't have to do anything for this. It was all provided. Okay? But now in Mashiach Yahushua, you are sometimes who are made near by the blood of Mashiach. And this is the last last verse that we'll get into, for he is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of the partition between us. Now let's go on to the next one. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in the human dogma, for to make himself from the two one renewed man, to making peace. Okay? There's a lot of information in those verses. First, he has become our peace. Okay? He's become our shalom. Okay? Shalom from shalom means a covenant of peace. Yahuwah's covenant of peace through Yahushua has made both houses one again. The partition has been removed. Okay, that's the first aspect of it. The partition has been removed. It's been torn in two. There is nothing to separate the house of Judah from the house of Israel. Another thing, though, is that the curtain that was in the temple was meant to separate the Israelites from the Goyim. They couldn't go through that. Okay? So that partition tore down to make it possible once again for the prince to minister to the people of the land. But it can only happen if both houses are once again a single house. Okay? And so the partition has been removed, and he's abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in human dogma. He has abolished your dogma. He has abolished the takanot of the rabbis. In other words, he's just told them a few verses back, you need to go back to the halakha. You need to go back and teach the halakha. You need to abandon the dogma. In this case, the takanot of the rabbis, because the doctrine of the church had not materialized as of yet. Okay? The church fathers were still, really weren't much in existence around the time of Paul. They would come into being shortly after Paul. But at this point, he's still ministering to both nations. He's telling the house of Israel, don't get hooked up in the halakha of the house of Judah. And he's telling both houses, you need to stick with the facts. Okay? And from that, to make himself from two, one renewed ish. One renewed man. One renewed ish. Why didn't it use one renewed Adam? It's one renewed ish. In the Torah, masculine aspects deal with physical worship. In other words, the spiritual and the physical have to be one. To be a renewed ish means that your worship has to be true. Yahushua told the woman at the well, you worship what you don't know. You're worshiping what you don't understand. And she says, what are you talking about? Our father Jacob dug this well. And our father Jacob drank from this well. And his children drank from this well. And his cattle drank from this well. There is a loss of integrity taking place in those three aspects. First of all, our father Jacob dug this well. Yaakov means to supplant, to replace one thing with another. Our doctrines created this water. And then our father Jacob drank from it. What had supplanted consumed it. And he gave it to his children, his banah. They became restored and established according to the word that had been supplanted in this water, which moved on to, and our cattle drank from it. Our behemah drank from it. Behemah means cattle, a beast, but it connotates a four-legged animal that has no ability to think. Spiritual poverty. It led to spiritual poverty. And then she says, we worship on this mountain, but you say we should worship in Jerusalem. Well, they're worshiping on Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim is where the promises were given, the blessings were given. Mount Ebal is where the curses were given. We're standing on the blessings even though we are worshiping what has supplanted the truth. But you say we have to worship in Jerusalem. We have to worship your way. So what are they worshiping in Jerusalem? The Pharisees are there. They got Takanot. The Takanot, a few hundred years later, would become the Talmud. So Yahushua tells her what? The day's coming that you'll neither worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem, because your religion or their religion is irrelevant. The Father is seeking those who will worship according to what the primitive First Baptists teach. Correct? What kind of people is the Father looking for? He's looking for those who will worship in spirit and in truth. You can't worship in spirit unless you have truth. You can't have a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim unless you know how to have a relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. And no amount of doctrine or takanot is going to teach you how to have a relationship. Now, that being said, you can extrapolate. Not all doctrine is wrong. Not all takanot is wrong. You can extrapolate from this. You can. My question is, if you have 10, not commandments, they're 10 devarim, they're 10 proclamations, 10 declarations, 10 warnings. If I have 10 things that my Elohim has told me that I need to do in order to have a good life and be in a relationship with Him, why would I want to extrapolate from doctrine or takanot or try to make sense of 613 mitzvot if I only have 10 that I have to follow? This is why Moses says, guys, it's not too hard for you. Stop making it more than it is. You don't have to cross the ocean to get to the truth. You don't have to go to the moon to get to the truth. It's right here. So what was the halakha that the prince is ultimately going to teach? 10 simple commandments. The book of Ezekiel was almost not canonized because the rabbis said the sacrifices in Ezekiel are contradictory to the sacrificial system in the book of Leviticus, because they don't understand that the sacrifices given in Ezekiel that will only last 10 months and then animal sacrifices will cease deal with the sacrifices of the future according to the priesthood of Melchizedek. The Levitical priesthood no longer exists. It does not exist today. And if you're trying to live according to the things that the book of Levi tells you to do, then you need to reconsider that. And people will look at me and say, you're crazy. It's in the Torah. Yes, it is. But we are under the priesthood of Melchizedek. Where do we find what the priesthood of Melchizedek tells us to do?